Hi, I'm Peter Dennis. I'm chairman of TTI, which is the Travel Technology Initiative. Well, I started life as the infamous travel courier, drinking a lot. And that's how it all started, really, for me, I guess, the travel industry. It's actually how I met my wife. And we kind of had some fun, doing the summertime down on the beach and then winter up in the Alps. So that's kind of where I learned to ski. From that, I went into the cruise ship industry. I worked for Fred Olsen in the very early days. And then I moved completely out of cruising and into the hotel industry. And I started life looking after travel agency business, working actually on property as well. And I progressed through the travel industry, working for several hotel groups until I ended up with Marriott, basically in the late 1980s, early 1990s. I was responsible then for travel agency business, predominantly kind of in the corporate space. But what I got exposed to very early on was the idea that, the telephone as a way of making bookings was going to be challenged by this new thing that was emerging called GDS. And GDS back then was termed CRS, and those of us who are a bit older in the industry still refer to it as CRS. And I worked within a group that was looking at putting hotels onto GDS. And that was really in the early 1990s. That was a really interesting project. And from that, I then progressed up to become the interactive director for Marriott, looking at e-commerce before this thing called the internet emerged. And then actually, as the internet broke in '94, late '94, we first heard that word internet. I was then part of a very small team at Marriott who were working on the first ever Marriott.com website, which was groundbreaking back then. I mean, I can remember seeing the first little Marriott logo appearing on a computer screen for the first time ever. And it was a groundbreaking moment because prior to that, it was all black screen, green writing, in the early days of word processors. So I progressed up through my career. I stayed on at Marriott just before the .com launch. I was traveling the world, literally, doing a lot of speaking, public speaking on this new thing called the internet that people were like, not sure what this thing is called. And I actually think a very memorable moment was I was on one of the very first EasyJet flights. And EasyJet had a telephone number down the side of the plane. And I was traveling somewhere, I can't remember where, but sat next to me was this Greek guy that kind of owned EasyJet at the time. And we got talking, it was one of the first ever things. And he said to me, "What do you do?" And I said, "Well, I work at Marriott, I'm involved in the internet." And he was like, "Yeah, we've heard of this thing called the internet, but we don't think it's anything." So it's quite funny, actually, how you think, the world has progressed. So I worked in Marriott all the way through until, as I say, just prior to the .coms. And I suddenly then realized, well, actually, I could probably make a lot more money on my own, doing this internet thing, but still passionate about travel. And I, during the .coms, got involved in a number of businesses where I thought I was never going to have to work ever again, but we kind of live and learn out of that. I came out of that, and then I set up my own consulting practice, again, looking at travel, particularly hotels, looking at e-commerce. Till right up to date now, where I kind of own several businesses. I have investments in several travel businesses, and I kind of just got pushed, I think is the word, into become the chairman of TTI. And I think the reason why that happened is that throughout my e-commerce life, my professional life in the travel business, I've been passionate about standards, because being a techie guy myself, it really is all about standards. If everybody's out there trying to reinvent the wheel, it would cost millions to kind of integrate. And I learned that lesson very early on at Marriott in the early days of the internet, where I kind of was one of the original founders of the organization called Hedna, the Hotel Electronic Distribution Network Association, which now is quite a big organisation globally. We were looking at standards then in GDS, and then this thing called XML came along, and that gave birth to the Open Travel Alliance, as it was called back then, OTA, and I was kind of sitting on the board of that very early on. That's now called Open Travel. So yeah, I've always been passionate about standards, and really that's what TTI is all about, is looking at these standards within the industry that help people to connect, really, and to do business together. So that's how I got to where I am.